So when you're buying a new film camera, you're usually buying from the big brands like Olympus, Pentax, Nikon, Leica, or Canon. So when you're buying a new camera body, you're usually buying into that ecosystem of lenses. One of the main competitors in the value vintage lens space is Canon, and specifically the Canon FD lines of lenses. Now, specifically here, I'm going to be talking about the Canon 28mm 2.8 lens. Now this is for the infamous camera, the Canon AE1, the Canon A1, and the Canon F1. A lens that people usually choose first off when going for a new camera is a 50mm. They're kind of like the set standard, and they're kind of useful for a lot of different shooting situations. Now, looking at the other side of the spectrum, a bit wider, you have the 28mm lens. It gives you a lot more to shoot with, in my opinion. I consider 50mm lenses to be great. You know, everyone recommends them, but in some ways, they're a bit too, they're kind of in the middle of no man's land. It's like it's the jack of all trades but master of none concept, and it definitely applies for the 50mm lens. It's great for, you know, portraits. It's great for just out and about shots and sceneries, but it doesn't really nail them and perfect them. I think 28mm, in my opinion, is just a great everyday shooting focal length because it doesn't matter what you're shooting, you're gonna be able to fit in frame. If you're shooting a landscape, you can fit all of that in. If you're shooting friends and family, you can fit more people in the frame. If you're really close having a meal with someone and want to take their picture, you can do that with a 28mm lens. That's the beauty of it. You don't need to be really far away. Now, specifically this Canon FD 28mm 2.8 is a lens that I actually chucked in the back burner for a long time. I chucked this lens in a drawer for such a long time and didn't really touch it. I was kind of put off by the focal length. I always thought it's far too wide. It's got a weird distorting look, and 2.8 used to be slow in my opinion, coming from a prime lens, you know, at 1.8 or 1.4. But forcing myself to shoot this exclusively for a few months on my Canon AE1, I would not go back to a 50 as the lens that's always on my camera. I would jump to a 50 every so often, but the 28mm is what I will go for 9 times out of 10. The functionality it has is brilliant, and I love the look. If you can nail a composition with a 28mm and bring it all together, it's really great. Some tips I would give for shooting a 28mm is definitely think about what's in your scene. If you're shooting a landscape, you want to have something in the foreground, or you want to have something that's closer to the camera or the frame, because otherwise it can look very barren, empty, and like a wasteland. And same for portraiture. Things can look very distant very quickly, so you really need to consider with a 28mm lens, but I think it just gives you a lot more to play with in the frame and compose your shot with. This isn't going to be like a super technical review of the lens. It's going to be a real life shooting experience after shooting many rolls of film with it, shooting with it for almost 2 years. It's just going to be a really how it is to use in real life world situations. And what I can tell you, which I'm happy to confirm, is that the quality of this lens is fantastic. Initially when I was using this lens, I thought the quality wasn't that good, but I think I just had some weird sort of mindset towards it, because shooting it more I realized how sharp it is, how nice the character is on it, and the depth of field you can get with close-up shots is perfect. I use this lens even in low light situations, so I've used it on film on my Canon AE1 at 1/15 of a second at 2.8, and I'm still able to get really nice sharp images. And because you're shooting a wider focal length, when you shoot at lower shutter speeds, it can actually handle the handheld shots. When you're using a 50mm lens and you're trying to shoot at 1/15 of a second, most of the time you're going to get motion blur and the shots aren't going to look as good. 28mm lens lets you shoot in low light situations, and it keeps it a lot more steady. So this lens can be picked up for like peanuts online. This one was in mint condition. I picked it up for about £50, and that's full retail price. That's how much this lens goes for. It's about £50, which I would say is really great. A lot of people are put off, as I said, by how wide it is, but it's also quite a familiar focal length, because phones usually have 28mm focal lengths, like the iPhone and things, they shoot with a 28mm focal length. So that's why when you shoot with this lens, it looks very familiar, because when you're shooting with your phone or on Instagram or on social media, people use a 28mm lens. The difference here though, compared to a phone, is obviously this is full frame. The depth of field you can get and the sharpness and clarity and things and contrast are a lot nicer than you would get on a tiny little phone sensor. So some key features to state about the lens is it's incredibly light. I don't know the weight off by hand, but it's such a light lens. Compared to my 50mm Canon lens, this thing is one of the lightest Canon FD lenses. I think it might actually be the lightest lens. It's a really small form factor as well, and the camera's super light, and you can just chuck this in a bag, no problem. It doesn't get in the way, it's not intrusive. I just think it's funny because, as I said, like 50mm was my focal length. My 51.4 was what I shot for a good year solid. I thought that that was the focal length for everything, and then as soon as I went to 28mm, I was like, what was I thinking? There's so much stuff I missed within a frame, you know. I was thinking so close in and so tight on a subject when there was everything else I could have fit into a frame. I love the storytelling you can do with a 28mm lens, and for shooting in low light, as I said, 2.8 and 1.4, they kind of balance each other out. It's a hard thing to imagine and think about, and it kind of sounds like nonsense, but when you're shooting a 2.8 and a 1.4, the slow shutter speed you can shoot with a 28mm lens kind of balances out compared to a 50, in my opinion. Let me think, what other stuff is there to say about it? The build quality of this lens is average, to be honest. It's got a plastic build, you know. It's not up there with the likes of Nikon build quality of vintage lenses. Canon definitely skimped out a little bit on the building materials, you know. It's plastic, it's very durable plastic, it's very light plastic, but it doesn't feel, you know, it doesn't ooze cheapness. It's good, and for today's standards it's fine, but compared to some other really solid metal lenses, this one does, you know, it does stray a bit from the competition. Really, this lens is targeting people if you own the Canon 81, which a lot of people do. You know, it was one of the most popular film cameras when it came out. A lot of people own this camera. If you just have a 50mm lens, I would highly recommend picking up the 28mm lens. It's one of the cheapest Canon FD lenses, it's one of the sharpest, it's one of the lightest, and it's one of the smallest. So that kind of tells you why you should be picking it up. That's going to wrap things up here. Thank you for watching. If you have any comments about this lens, if you want to know any more technical stuff, please leave it down in the comments. I'll be sure to respond to that. Subscribe to the channel, it's greatly appreciated. I'm keeping up with my uploading a lot of videos during this quarantine. So yeah, I appreciate your time watching this video, and I hope that it's made you think about getting a 28mm lens.